The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh paint as I stepped back to admire my handiwork. My little Victorian terraced house in the quaint English town of Willowford gleamed with a soft sage green coat, a far cry from the peeling gray it had been when I bought it last year. I, Sophie Bennett, had spent weeks saving up for the paint and scaffolding, determined to make the place my own. As a freelance illustrator, I loved color, and this house was my canvas, a reflection of the new chapter I was building after a messy divorce. But that sunny afternoon, as I wiped paint from my hands, a shadow loomed over my victory. A crisp letter arrived from the Willowford Homeowners Association, signed by Eleanor Hargreaves, the HOA president. My heart sank as I read, "Dear Ms. Sophie Bennett, it has come to our attention that you have painted your property without prior approval from the HOA, in violation of Section 4.2 of the Community Guidelines. A fine of £500 has been issued, payable within 7 days, or further action will be taken. Sincerely, Eleanor Hargreaves." I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. A fine? For painting my own house? I checked the HOA guidelines when I moved in, and while they were strict about things like garden maintenance, the rules on exterior paint were vague. Just a mention of maintaining community aesthetics. I'd even consulted a neighbor, Thomas Clark, who said sage green was a common color in Willowford. How could this be a violation? I marched to my laptop and emailed Eleanor, politely explaining that I'd chosen a neutral color and hadn't realized approval was needed. Could we discuss this? Her reply was curt. "The rules are clear, Ms. Bennett. Pay the fine or face legal action." I tried calling, but she didn't answer. Frustration bubbled inside me. This wasn't just about $500. It was about my home, my pride. The next day, I visited the HOA office, a small room in the community center cluttered with files and faded floral curtains. Eleanor Hargreaves, a stern woman in her 60s with a pinched expression, sat behind a desk. Beside her was a man in a tweed jacket, introduced as Nigel Baxter, the HOA's solicitor. I'd come prepared with photos of my house, showing the fresh paint blended perfectly with the neighboring homes, and a copy of the guidelines, which I'd highlighted to show their ambiguity. "Ms. Hargreaves?" I began, keeping my voice calm. I didn't know I needed approval. The guidelines don't specify a process for painting. Sage green matches the aesthetic of Willowford. Look at these photos. Eleanor barely glanced at them. "Ms. Bennett, the HOA exists to maintain standards. We've had complaints about your paint choice disrupting the neighborhood's character. The fine stands." "Complaints?" I asked, incredulous. "Who complained? My neighbors love it. Thomas Clark even helped me pick the shade." Nigel leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "That's confidential. But the board has reviewed the matter, and the fine is non-negotiable unless you repaint the house to an approved color." I left the meeting fuming. Repaint? I'd spent £2,000 on materials and labor. There was no way I was undoing my work. But $500 wasn't pocket change either. I was barely scraping by with my freelance gigs. I needed to fight this. That night, I pored over the HOA guidelines again, scouring forums and legal advice websites. The rules were outdated, written in the 1990s, and didn't explicitly require pre-approval for painting, only that colors complement the community. Sage green was hardly neon pink. I suspected Eleanor was flexing her authority, but why? I decided to find out who was behind the complaints. The next morning, I started canvassing my street, Primrose Lane. Most neighbors were delighted with my house's new look. Mrs. Clara Whitmore, an elderly widow next door, said it brought a bit of cheer to the street. James Hartley, a young dad across the road, even asked for the paint code for his own house. But when I knocked on Mrs. Victoria Langley's door, a well-off retiree known for her pristine roses and nosy tendencies, I hit a wall. "Oh, that color," Victoria sniffed, eyeing my house from her doorstep. "It's far too modern. Willowford has a certain charm, you know. I told Eleanor it's an eyesore." I forced a smile. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Mrs. Langley. I chose it to match the other houses. Did I miss something in the rules?" She huffed. "It's not just rules, it's taste. I've lived here 30 years and we don't need newcomers changing things." She shut the door before I could respond. It was clear now. Victoria was the complainant, or at least the ringleader. But her reasoning felt personal, not aesthetic. I needed more than a hunch to fight the fine. I contacted a friend, Laura Evans, who worked at a local law firm. She wasn't a property lawyer, but knew enough to point me to the land registry and local council regulations. Check the HOA's authority, she advised. Sometimes these groups overstep. I also started a petition among the neighbors, explaining the fine and asking for support to challenge the HOA's vague rules. To my surprise, 15 households signed within 2 days, including Clara and James. The real breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Oliver Reed, a gardener who worked for several homes on Primrose Lane, including Victoria's. I ran into him while he was trimming hedges, and we got chatting. When I mentioned the fine, he raised an eyebrow. "That's odd," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Victoria's been on about your house for weeks. Said it makes hers look dated. She's been pestering Eleanor to enforce the rules, but I heard her say something about wanting to sell her place soon. Reckon she thinks your fancy paint job's stealing her thunder." It clicked. Victoria wasn't just offended. She was worried my house's fresh look would outshine hers on the market. A quick check on a property website confirmed her house was listed for sale, priced ambitiously high. My renovation was a threat to her profit. With Laura's help, I dug deeper. The HOA's guidelines were registered with the council, but I found a loophole. Any fines over £200 required a vote from the full board, not just Eleanor's say-so. I also discovered Eleanor and Victoria were old friends, often seen gossiping at the local tea room. It smelled like a stitch-up. I needed evidence. Oliver, bless him, came through again. He'd overheard a conversation while working at Victoria's and recorded it on his phone. Not deliberately, just a habit from noting client instructions. In the clip, Victoria was bragging to Eleanor, "If you find that Bennett girl, she'll have to repaint. My buyer's coming next week, and I don't want her house stealing the show." Armed with this, I contacted a solicitor, Charlotte Hayes, who specialized in property disputes. Charlotte sent a letter to Eleanor, citing the HOA's failure to follow its own procedures, the recording as evidence of bias, and the petition showing community support. She threatened to escalate to the council and small claims court if the fine wasn't dropped. The response was immediate. The next day, Eleanor called, her voice syrupy with false apology. "Ms. Bennett, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. The fine has been rescinded and will clarify the guidelines at the next board meeting." I later learned Victoria's sale fell through. Her buyer preferred my charming greenhouse and made an offer on a different property. As I sat on my porch that evening, sipping tea and admiring my sage green home, I felt a surge of pride. I'd fought for my right to make this house mine, and I'd won. A week later, I saw Victoria in her garden, avoiding my gaze as she pruned her roses. I waved cheerfully. She fined me for painting my house and regretted it immediately.